Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Tell Me About podcast, where each week two nerdy friends deep dive random topics. I'm Tom.
And I'm Laura.
So, before we start this week's episode, a little bit of a background as to how we do these shows, and a little bit of a preview as to what we're doing today, because we're doing something a little bit different today. So, we try to record these podcasts at least once a week. And as you notice through our first few episodes, we're not necessarily doing timely podcasts, or we're not doing podcasts of current events. We tend to do deep dives on things that have happened well before, because that's what we're interested in. If there are podcasts that are more timely, we usually will get those out first, but we try to record as many of these as we can because, quite frankly, your two hosts have a day job too.
We have day jobs and families and very busy lives.
Exactly. So we're letting you know this because we're recording this episode on October 1st of 2023. There are going to be a couple of things that we talk about in this episode that are going to be timely and current to when we're recording this, not when it's being released. And we tell you that because we're doing something a little bit different, doing something a little bit fun. We've been diving into some pretty heavy topics the first couple of weeks, but we're trying some. We have. Listen, as I said, for the Amelia Earhart episode, we've really cornered the market on plane crashes. We're at least ranked number 2 in the plane crash podcast section. But we're trying something tonight. We might do as a somewhat recurring episode, not necessarily all the time, but something we may do every couple of months or a couple times a year. And we want to get your feedback on it, whether you like it, whether you want us to do more of these episodes.
So our episodes tend to be very research heavy. So from time to time, we want to have these lighter episodes, have a little bit more fun with it. So like Tom said, definitely tell us what you think. If there's other things that, you want us to look into, but we're hoping this is definitely a little bit lighter, a little more fun than what we've been putting out so far.
And as we've talked about before, both Laura and myself are big fans of The Office.
Yes, very big fans.
So what we're actually doing today is we're going to be going through one of our favorite episodes, and we're going to be deep diving an Office episode. This is something we may end up doing with some other shows. Dateline, definitely. We might do at least one Dateline episode like this. We may do some other movies. Again, this is not going to be a all the time thing. This is not just going to become a rewatch podcast, but this is something we're trying, and we want to really get your feedback on how you like it, if you like it, or if there's any episodes or any other shows that you want us to do. So please leave a comment on our Instagram, our TikTok, our Gmail. We'll give you all that at the end of the show. Let us know your thoughts. We want to be interacting with you. With that being said, we are going to do the great Office episode, one of my favorites, and we hope it's one of yours too, Dinner Party.
So this episode is based on a play called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, about an older married couple who invite a younger married couple that they work with for a dinner party, and a lot of craziness ensues. So you can see a lot of parallels between the two. And I honestly thought, watching this, because it's not in their typical setting, and there's just a lot more going on, I think, between the characters, that almost felt like a play this episode. Do you feel the same way or no?
It's set up that way, in which you have kind of 3 acts leading to the crescendo. So it was one of those things, I didn't realize it because I'd heard of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I'd never seen it before. Once you told me that, it made a lot more sense. You can kind of see it.
So Dinner Party is season 4, episode 13 of The Office, and it originally aired on April 10th, 2008. The episode was written by Gene Stupnitsky and Lee Eisenberg, who, for those of you who are not aware, they were the warehouse guys. If you remember from early on in the show, those 2 warehouse guys that sold Michael that bag of weed, or that fake bag of weed, that's Gene and Lee, and they've written a lot of different episodes of The Office. This episode was directed by Paul Feig. Now, he was not set to be the original director of this episode, and we're going to get into that in a little bit in a minute, but they came down to Paul Feig, and he certainly likes a cringe factor, and that comes through on this episode for sure.
One thing, and by the way, too, before we go any further, there are spoilers in here if you haven't seen The Office or if you haven't seen this episode. So we will put a spoiler alert in here, but really it's been 15 years.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it by
If,
now, I
if you
mean,
haven't seen it by now, that's on you.
yeah.
One of the things too, and I want to bring this up because one thing Greg Daniels loves to do is to put writers in the show. Obviously, BJ Novak played Ryan Howard. Mindy Kaling was a writer, and obviously she played Kelly.
Paul Lieberstein played Toby.
There's a couple of Greg Daniels signatures in this episode that really kind of shine through, and we'll get to it more as we go through the episode. So, Laura, you want to get started on Dinner Party?
Let's do it. So, first, I just have to say personally, I watched this episode back when it aired in 2008. The first time I watched this, I was not a big fan of it. It just, I don't know, it came off as boring to me. I don't know, but the more I watch it and the more time that has gone by, I really have learned to appreciate it, and I think it's honestly one of the best episodes of The Office.
The cringe factor in the episode is part of the punchline.
Yes, absolutely.
It's supposed to be cringe, and I think that's what makes it funny. Now, there's a topical version to this. As we mentioned before, we're recording this on October 1st. If you are aware, about a week and a half ago, the Writers Guild just ended their strike, and they had a landmark deal that by all accounts they received pretty much everything or damn near everything they were asking for. But the reason why I bring that up is last time we had a strike was back in 2007, 2008, which was this season of The Office, season 4. In fact, this episode was scheduled to be taped in November of 2007, right when the strike began. And as such, it was the first episode filmed after the strike had resolved. And it was the first original episode of The Office to air after the strike ended in April of 2008. And the reason why it wasn't going to be filmed is Steve Carell, like a king, refused to cross the picket line.
Love that.
Absolutely. We have no choice but to stand. So keep that in mind. We're also going to get into something a little later on by near the end of the episode, because there is a little bit of Office news as we record this, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Now, Tom, how did you feel the first time you saw this episode? I mentioned how I thought about it, and the general fan response at the time was not very positive, but now in 2023, it is one of the most beloved episodes. So what did you think about it when you first saw it?
Cringe. There are some episodes where it's hard for me to get through it the first time because my stomach is literally cringing into knots.
And I agree with you. It is super cringy. I think there's a difference though between this episode and let's say like Scott's Tots, because that is also super cringy. And to this day, I really can't get through this episode, whereas this one has become one of my favorites. So it's kind of different, the dichotomy there of why this one is a little bit more digestible over time. And I think for a lot of people, Scott's Tots is not.
And again, the cringiness is the point here. It's the desired effect. It's the punchline throughout the entire episode. Once you kind of understand that, it makes it so much funnier. And I think it lands so much better because the actors are feeling the same way you are watching it.
Mm-hmm.
For The Office, for the signature basically punchline being the camera stares, we get some all-timers from everybody.
Mm-hmm. So the episode starts with a scene filmed at the office where it's a Friday night. The staff is working late on a special assignment from corporate. And Michael goes into his office and makes this overdramatic fake call, essentially, to corporate that, these people are his friends and how dare they make him work like this. And Jim, you can see slowly is starting to figure out that, this is bullshit and that Michael intentionally made them stay. Then he goes over to Jim and basically says, you don't have any plans tonight, come over for dinner, which Michael has been angling for him and Pam to come to a dinner party for quite some time now.
One of my favorite cold opens is Jim going, I have to respect it. I don't think there ever was a call from corporate.
This was one of the most genius things that Michael Scott did. It was very well thought out. He thought of every scenario here, and he really, like I said, cornered them into having to agree to come to this dinner party. So I think for Michael Scott, it was a pretty cool thing.
I love it because it shows how clever Michael can be every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And you see these little glimpses of where he goes from being kind of the incompetent boob that he is into this kind of not conniving, but this very smart, clever person. And you see it in flashes. You see it when he's making the deal at the Chili's with Tim Meadows. You see it when he's negotiating the buyout with David Wallace, which is still one of my favorite lines in the show. I don't have to wait out Dunder Mifflin. I only have to wait out you. But it really is, it's a very clever, it's maybe one of my favorite cold opens from that season. It's not my absolute favorite, though. My favorite is still Meredith getting run over by the car.
So I did want to add, there is a deleted scene to this episode, the cold open, where Toby actually had tickets to a Tom Petty concert that he had to give away to his ex and her new boyfriend. So I thought that was a really nice little cherry on top. So it's a shame that got deleted from the final cut.
So after the cold open and after the credits, we cut to Jim and Pam showing up at Michael's condo.
Now, did you notice that Michael and Jan both try to hug Jim at the same time, and then Michael only hugs Pam, which I thought that was funny.
And there's a reason for that, and we will get to that later because something gets revealed during the middle part of this episode that Pam does not like.
I also think Jan's quip about the wine, that it's great to cook with, that really was a little jab there. It's, and you can tell in Pam's face that she doesn't appreciate that.
Again, this is a great episode for catching little details.
Mm-hmm. There are a ton of little details throughout this episode, and we'll try to mention as many as we can as we go through.
So as they're taking them into the living room, they offer to do a tour of the house. They're constantly calling each other babe. That's another kind of recurring joke, and that'll come into effect later on. You'll see that a lot more later on. And then we also notice the tarp over the sliding door.
I actually didn't notice that in first until later, but on the rewatch, yeah, you can definitely see it in the corner. Yeah. Now I do want to mention as they start the tour and they start to go up the stairs, there's a Andy Warhol style photo of Jan. It has like 4 different photos of her in different lights, and you can catch it. There is a deleted scene that shows it better, but you can catch it as they go up the stairs briefly. Now, this artwork with the 4 different photos of her, you can see this later again in season 9, episode The Whale, when Pam and Dwight go to her office when she's working for the phone book company. And that's kind of one thing that tips off Pam that this is Jan's office. So I thought that was cool, that how it, makes a reappearance in season 9.
One thing The Office does so well, and all of Greg Daniels' shows do so well, is everything gets used. And they are so good at tying things in from earlier seasons and making sure there are as little to no kind of continuity loopholes as possible.
Mm-hmm.
They are so good at that, and they make it just so seamless.
Mm-hmm. They really do. Yeah. Now, I also want to mention that the condo in reality was located in Woodland Hills, California, and they actually rented it out for a week, repainted it, and then they had to put it back the exact way that the owner had it prior.
Now, and I think this is not the first time they've used that, because that is Michael's condo.
Yes,
in
correct.
The show.
So they also use it in Office Olympics when he signs the mortgage paperwork for the condo.
So as they continue the tour, they show Jan's office. They show her candle room with her candles.
They do say that there were actual candles in that room, and it had a very pungent smell to it. And there's something else that I wanted to mention, because they show both her office space and her workspace. And if you look closely to her office space, the desk chair still has plastic cover on the arms. So it is essentially telling you that she doesn't really spend much time in that room, but she needed both a separate office space and a workspace. So that gives you the insight into Jan.
We also get one of just the classic Jim faces early on when he smells the candle.
It's the best, yeah.
So one of the just subtle jokes they have here is after they go through the workspace and the candle room, they take them to the bedroom. And now we don't usually see this. We've only, I think, seen this one other time in the show. That's actually in the beginning of Fun Run when they show her passed out on the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And before he hits Meredith. And now when they see it, you'll notice there's a video camera next to the bed. And we get our first really cringe moment of the show when Jan says, "You were supposed to put that away."
Do you think that was intentional that they left it out? Because it always seemed It always seemed to me that it was an intentional thing by either one of them, but I don't know. What do you think?
It is, I mean, it would make sense with both of their characters. Neither one is set up to be all that subtle when it comes to sexual innuendo
Yep, exactly.
and double entendres. So it almost becomes like a not so humble brag. And I think that's part of the joke. I think you can argue that's part of the joke, is it's supposed to be a not so humble sex joke, and which really kind of fits into, or it's almost kind of a look at how much sex we're having that we need a video camera. But like with everything else in their relationship that's been written up to this point, it's all kind of a facade, and you see that as the episode goes on start to kind of wear away.
So then we see Michael's bench at the end of the bed, which is essentially his bed where he sleeps at night. Now, listening to the Office Ladies podcast about this episode, they really said that it was hard to get through when he curled up on the bench. They kept, breaking out in laughter, and they really had to sit in the awkwardness of that scene. But I really think that really highlights the dysfunction and kind of the unequal power balance in the relationship between the two of them. And it's just honest. I don't know. I always felt, you always feel bad for Michael in that scene, because like, this is his condo and he is just, segregated to this tiny little bench at the end of the bed. And it just, I don't know, you definitely feel bad for him in that moment.
That reminded me, there's a King of the Hill episode. One of the main characters is Bill Dauterive, who's played by the great Stephen Root, who is phenomenal. He was great in News Radio. He's great in Dodgeball. He's the one who gets run over trying to dodge traffic in the street. Anyway, there's Bill Dauterive, if you know the show, is very much of a sad sack. He's depressed. His wife, everyone takes advantage of him. His wife has left him multiple times. Everyone leaves him. He's tried self-harm multiple times. There's a throwaway line when he's at a hotel in Austin, and he goes, "I remember this hotel. It's where my ex-wife and I spent our honeymoon." He goes, "And that's the couch where I slept." And that just reminded me of Michael curling up in the little bench like a ball, like a little dog. And it just reminded me of that. And Greg Daniels is genius.
He really is. Yeah. So the next scene, they come back downstairs and Michael shows Jim and Pam how big is the TV?
I think it's like 28.
Yeah, it's very, very tiny. Yeah.
It looks like a TV you would have in a dorm room.
Mm-hmm. And if you guys look up the bloopers to that scene, it's very, very funny. Jenna and John could not get through that scene. It took them 18 to 19 takes to get that the way they wanted it. But I mean, it's hilarious the way he shoves it back against the wall to get it out of the way. It's an iconic scene of The Office. It really is.
And it just is, it's so Michael that he's just so proud of, and then he shows the case where he displays the Dundies. Yeah, it just gives, when it's the first day and he has the full head of hair and he's posing for the picture and his first day at Dunder Mifflin. It just gives that sort of vibe. And he's so proud of these little things that he does.
You can also see off to the side is that crate table that he handmade. And he says to Jim that it's either made out of pine or Nordic cherry. It does look pine to me.
It's after this that they say, "Well, when are we eating?" Well, we have, I think it was like a roast in the oven.
Jan was cooking an osso buco, which I had no idea what that was. So of course I had to Google it. And essentially it is veal shanks with veggies, white wine, and broth.
Which is very good.
I've never had it.
I mean, it sounds good. I've never had it either, but it sounds good. And then she goes, "It takes 3 hours to make." And Pam goes, "Well, is it ready now?" "No, I'm just starting it now."
3 hours from now or 3 hours from this afternoon when you put it in?
My favorite cutaway is Pam in the bathroom. She's holding us hostage. So it's after this, as we're waiting that Andy and Angela show up. Angela, she's having the affair with Dwight.
She's having the affair yet? Because obviously she's with Andy, but I don't know. Because she hasn't yet, because I think it starts back up again at Goodbye Toby, which is the end of season 4, I believe.
Okay, so she hasn't. It's building toward her having the affair with Dwight, and this is maybe one of my favorite Angela episode, because she is at her and I say this as a compliment, her bitchy best
She is. You can see when she walks in, and this was not in the script either. She gives this very judgmental look to Jan, essentially looking at her boobs and then looking at her, saying with her look to her that, this is highly inappropriate.
Just the contempt that she has for everyone that's not herself and her cats.
Exactly. I also do want to put in an aside here that in real life, Angela Kinsey was about 8 months pregnant during this episode, and her and Jenna on Office Ladies talked at length about how they had to go and cover her belly and put pillows in front of her and do all this stuff. So, I mean, I think they did a really great job. And, I'm sure it was a long day or a long week, filming this, being 8 months pregnant at the time.
Absolutely. And she was a trooper.
She was.
And honestly, I did not notice until you told me.
No, I think women tend to pick it up a little bit more. Something else that I noticed was Andy's many layers that he has on at that night. He's got a turtleneck. He's got multiple sweaters on. He takes off his coat to reveal this. It's a lot of layers.
And that's just it's one of those little things that you don't notice unless you've watched it a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing too is you'll notice there's a lot more improvisation that makes the final cut here than most Office episodes do. The Office is great because they allowed the actors, a lot of them were the writers, to kind of improvise as they saw fit. But a lot of it, there's much more of it that makes it through here than normally would. And it makes the episode really better because it makes the reactions to it genuine.
Mm-hmm. So after that, everybody is in the living room and they're enjoying a glass of wine. And one of the most famous lines that Michael Scott says, he mentions the oaky afterbirth taste of the wine. And it's weird. It's a weird way to describe it, but Steve Carell actually improvised that line that wasn't in the script. And that definitely led everybody to lose it again at that point.
And there's a point in the episode where there's another improvised moment by Melora Hardin, who plays Jan, that you can actually kind of see Jim breaking a little bit on camera. And we'll get to that later.
How any of them got through this episode is beyond me.
And it's really, it's an incredibly just funny episode. So after they're sitting enjoying the wine and Michael's discussing being a sommelier, Jan talks about her infamous assistant Hunter, who she may or may not have deflowered.
I think the song makes it pretty clear that, that's what happened.
And she talks about how talented Hunter is and how Hunter has put out a single. He's dropped a track. One thing, if you've ever seen Parks and Rec, you notice that show also has a lot of music as punchlines. Of course, the Mouse Rat, who was Andy Dwyer's band, Mouse Rat, and all the different names for Mouse Rat and all their songs. They actually recorded a couple songs, the infamous tribute to Little Sebastian, the little mini horse, and the song about Chris Pratt falling in the pit. But she plays the song that Hunter records, and that pretty strongly insinuates that Jan had an affair with her assistant Hunter and was his first sexual experience.
And he's a lot younger than her. I want to say like 15 to 20 years younger than her.
And as she's playing this, she's kind of dancing away in her own zone. And she grabs, this is another one of the improvised moments. She grabs Jim's hand and holds it as she's dancing.
He didn't even get up to dance with her. I just think that makes it even funnier. Like, I'm gonna let you do this to some degree, but I'm not gonna fully participate in this nonsense at the same time,
It's it's another just incredible daring camera gag in an episode that's full of them.
So I also wanted to mention that Gene and Lee, the writers of this episode, also wrote Hunter's song. And it was also not sung by the actor who played Hunter. It was actually sung by a man named Todd Fancy. They wrote a much longer version of this. You want to look it up on YouTube. You can see it there, but it's pretty intense. There's a lot to it.
It's also a banger. It's a little catchy. And Todd's a renowned musician. He's in a great band called the New Pornographers. That's one of my favorites. But it's a catchy song.
It is. I'll give them that. So next we see two talking heads from Pam and Jim in the tiny little bathroom in Michael's condo. And Pam says that she just wants to eat. That's what you do at a dinner party. And Jim says that the hosts are winning at making their guests uncomfortable. So they actually filmed those in a real tiny, tiny little bathroom, and the cameraman was filming them while sitting on the sink. So I thought that was interesting. There's also a deleted scene where Jim and Pam are talking outside of the bathroom, and she's eating a granola bar when Jan catches them and essentially kind of like snipes at her, like, "What are you eating?" Unfortunately, they cut that out, but I thought that was pretty funny.
So then after the cutaway scenes and the interview scenes with Jim and Pam in the bathroom, they play a game of charades. The game's called Celebrity, where they're trying to name celebrities, and they're trying to name as many celebrities as possible. So Angela, Andy, and Jan are on a team, and Jim, Pam, and Michael are on a team. So Andy, Angela, and Jan's team get their celebrities correctly. The first clue Michael throws out is rhymes with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Jan makes it very clear that there's no rhyming in this game.
And he's trying to say Tom Cruise, and Jim is guessing everything but Tom Cruise.
I love the way he kind of plays with Michael in that scene and gives him the wrong answer. I mean, because he knows what he's going for, but I think that's just Jim's own entertainment for himself and Pam, and I thought that was pretty good.
Well, then I love that after that, when he's trying to answer Arnold Schwarzenegger, he answers Tom Cruise.
It's very, again, the writers got their characters right, where Angela doesn't know a lot of pop culture and Andy was giving terrible clues. So I think it really goes in a line with how their characters would respond to that.
Now it's after this time where Jim decides to call in a Hail Mary and tries to get out of the party by saying his apartment is flooded.
Now, this was a very controversial scene for the fans, and we'll get into why.
And the facial expressions between Pam and Jim are outstanding, because first he's saying that he needs to get out of there, and Pam's going, "You're not leaving me, right?"
Like you can just read that what they're trying to tell the other person right on their face. So the acting was incredible.
Say what you want about Jim and Pam's relationship, you can't deny the chemistry that the two of them have. The face she makes when he calls in the fake flood and he's trying to get her out of there is just so it's subtle, but that little just subtle smile she gives is just so sweet. And then Michael stops him.
Now, this scene is controversial because fans were really mad at Jim for trying to leave Pam at the condo, essentially, but the writers said that it was really supposed to be more of a sweet moment and almost like this like mental chess match between the two of them. So I think the writers feel like the fans really misread that situation.
Well, and also too, people have very strong opinions on their relationship, whether it was healthy or not, and that's a whole nother ball of wax. The writers know where they wanted to go with this, and when you have clear direction, when you have a clear vision really of what you're trying to accomplish, it makes for a much better production. After Jim is thwarted, they're sitting in the living room. It's almost hours later. It's assumingly getting cold, and Michael, in a very sweet gesture, offers his jacket to Pam. It's at this point that they reveal that the sliding door is broken, and there's a reason for that.
So the reason that the sliding glass door was broken is because Michael ran through it running for the ice cream truck, which it's so funny and so good. And just you get this visual of him, this adult man, getting so excited hearing the ice cream truck that he runs right through the door. I mean, that visual is phenomenal.
And it's just so Michael.
Mm-hmm. It is very Michael.
And if you've ever seen the fire drill episode, you know what excited Michael is like.
So this leads to a back and forth between Jan and Michael, and she essentially says that she's the devil, and she improvised putting horns above her head. And it's interesting to point out that the visuals, as we mentioned in this episode, so they really carefully crafted this, that the theme was meant to be that Michael was in hell and Jan was the devil. So you can see that Jan is dressed in red, not only her shirt, but her lipstick is bright red, her nail polish is bright red. They placed her in front of the fireplace, and there's a lot of candles all around Michael just to symbolize that he's in hell. It's a very visual episode, and it's not until you kind of pick up on those things that you get what they were going for. It's supposed to be kind of in the background, but like I said, once you notice that, it's like, oh, I get it now. I can see that now.
And this begins really kind of the de-evolution of Michael and Jan's public veneer of being this sweet, loving couple. Because it's after she brings up the story about him running through the sliding door. Instead of loving kind of banter, it becomes this increasingly passive-aggressive chirps between each other, all ending with babe.
I think from here, this really, it's all downhill in terms of them arguing with each other and really calling each other out for the rest of the episode. So this I think really kicks it off to make it go downhill.
So it's after these little passive-aggressive chirps that Jan calls the girls' trip with Angela and Pam into the kitchen.
Now, I do want to point out as well, if you see in the kitchen, all of the pots and pans are also red, which again was very intentional for this episode.
I'll also point out that we mentioned that's one of the times where Jim kind of breaks was with the hand holding. The other time he breaks and you can see him kind of duck away from the camera trying not to laugh is when Jan's doing the devil horns. So at this point, the girls are in the kitchen and Michael pulls Andy and Jim into the garage with his exercise equipment where he tries to recruit them to invest in Jan's candles for the low price of $10,000.
Thought about it, I'm in. So I also wanted to mention, if you look around the garage, it's mostly stuff that you would buy on infomercials. And you mentioned the exercise equipment. So he has both a Bowflex and a Soloflex in the garage, as well as a lot of boxes marked as Michael stuff. So I think in one aspect, you can see Michael's behavior and impulsivity of buying a lot of stuff from infomercials and like QVC. And then on the opposite side, you have, Jan's influence where, she made him or did it herself, boxed up his stuff and moved it out to the garage.
Now, as this is going on in the garage, Jan is in the kitchen with Pam and Angela. The food is still not ready.
Not even close.
Not even close. It's at this point that Jan reveals that Michael told her him and Pam used to date. And the look of horror on Pam's face is, again, another one of those sight gags that's just make this episode work.
She's very quick to let her know that never happened, nor she ever would want that to happen.
It's absolutely phenomenal. So it's after this revelation that there's a knock at the door. They had told Dwight the party was for couples only because Jan does not like Dwight.
And there weren't enough wine glasses.
So Dwight shows up with a random lady and 2 wine glasses saying, "We're a couple and we're here."
He also, if you notice, has a cooler of food and 2 lawn chairs with him.
This is also where you see the look on Angela's face when Dwight shows up.
So I don't know if they actually say the character's name in the show, but the character's name is Melvina and used to be Dwight's babysitter. And this character was played by Beth Grant, and she's been in a ton of stuff. She's super talented. And she actually worked with Steve Carell slightly before this in Little Miss Sunshine. And she also worked with Greg Daniels on King of the Hill.
Beth Grant, I had to look this up. She plays Tilly. So she is Cotton Hill's first wife. She is Hank's mom.
Thank you. So once Dwight and his babysitter arrive, this really sets off another argument between Jan and Michael, and they're arguing in the entryway. And essentially it leads to them fighting about a vasectomy and how he's had multiple vasectomies because she keeps changing her mind about having children. So Steve actually improvised the line, snip, snap, you have no idea the physical toll 3 vasectomies takes on a person. And again, this just speaks to the comedic genius that is Steve Carell. It's incredible.
So after this, and after Dwight announces that it's not his mom, but it's his babysitter, and don't worry, the relationship is purely carnal.
Which is, the images, it's so gross.
Which is just such a Dwight line.
It is.
It's such a Dwight line. They finally sit down to eat, or they're finally getting ready to sit down to eat. Dinner is finally ready. And it's at this point that Jim whispers to Pam that you may want to check the food. The food might be poisoned. She might want to poison my food, which then leads to Michael dipping his ossobuco in his wine. This then leads to another argument because Jan notices, tells him to stop doing that. He then accuses her of taunting him because of his sensitive jaw and his overbite.
If you notice too, on the table, everybody has a wine glass, but they also have a second wine glass that is filled with water. So the argument that Jan didn't have enough wine glasses was false. That this is a slight little thing, that you could pick up on, that it's on the table.
And Dwight and his babysitter sitting on the lawn chairs.
Sitting on the lawn chairs, and they start eating as everybody else is waiting for Jan to bring out dinner. And it's so cringy and awkward. And, Angela declines Dwight's beet salad.
It's at this point that the arguing between Jan and Michael kind of reaches not its climax, but it kind of reaches a boiling point. One of the things Jan mentions when she first brings Jim and Pam into the house is she made Michael take down a neon St. Pauli girl beer sign that he used to keep on. This is, in a vacuum, it's logical because that's a very kind of frat decoration, the neon beer sign.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very kind of frat thing. So it's at this point where Michael has basically had enough, and he's, during dinner, going to draw a line in the sand. So he takes down one of the pictures. Is it the picture of the 4 Jans? I don't know.
That's not. That's going up the stairs. But interesting you mentioned that. It's a very abstract painting that is mostly red. Again, so bringing that red theme into it.
Bringing the red theme into it. He takes that down. He puts up the St. Pauli girl sign and turns it on. So now the entire room is blue.
It's a very weird visual to see everybody tinted with that blue glow. It's just, it really shifts. It really shifts the lighting into a weird way.
And when you think about everything red with Jan and now a blue glow behind Michael.
And they mentioned that dichotomy too, that Jan, like I mentioned, was more red, but then Michael also has on a blue sweater and has the blue light behind him with the beer sign. So it's almost like that red and blue, hot and cold type thing also as a visual to play off of that.
Devil and angel type of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
It's at this point that Jan snaps as well. She takes the Dundie and flings it into the plasma screen TV.
Which it's doubly sad for Michael because it's his plasma screen TV and his Dundie. So she was really looking to hurt him with that one.
She's looking to hurt him. There's more screaming. There's more arguing. They end this argument. Dwight's babysitter says that she's leaving. Everyone else is getting ready to leave. Is there a knock at the door?
I think as they're leaving,
Michael goes, "Oh Jesus!" and she sees the cops. Or I think it was like the state troopers. Dwight immediately comes out to meet them to try and assess the situation. They tell him basically, "Go away, Dwight."
So you see that like Dwight's been quite an annoyance for them, and you see that in earlier episodes that he wants to be more part of law enforcement than he's actually is or actually qualified for.
Now, is this before the pod episode?
I believe so. Yeah.
Where Dwight finds
no. I think it's after that because I think that's like either season 2 or 3 drug testing.
Yeah, when Dwight finds the joint in the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, the cops say that there's a domestic disturbance.
I'll take the fall.
I'll take the fall. He kept saying, "I'll take the fall." Dwight offers to have Michael sleep with him.
And you can see the hesitation in Michael's face, like, Jesus, I don't want to go home with Dwight, but it's his option at that point.
Dwight goes, "He could sleep with me." It's then after this that everyone departs. Michael leaves, and there's a whole set of vignettes afterwards. Everyone's eating because no one got to eat. Jim and Pam are at a burger place, and they're eating a burger, and they're actually marveling at, they keep calling each other babe, and they're marveling at how catchy Hunter's song is. He steals the CD, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yep, Jim steals the CD.
There's another vignette, and this is one of my favorites. It's so subtle, and it's so nonchalant, and it really just describes Angela's character perfectly. Angela and Andy afterwards are in the car. They ordered ice cream. Angela has an ice cream, and Andy kind of jokingly and playfully licks a little bit of it, to which then Angela, in one fell swoop, opens the window and smashes the ice cream cone on the side of the door.
She said it actually took a couple tries to get that right. And in between scenes when they were waiting, she said Ed Helms actually farted in the car, which proceeded to make her leave the car very quickly. But they thought it was a funny moment.
And then the last scene is actually Jan. It's like a voyeur not a voyeur, but like a shot through the window scene. And they've done this a couple times in The Office. Obviously they do it a lot of times with the parking, through the window looking at the parking lot. They've done it, in the break room. They did it. That's when they did the scene where Stanley is screaming at Ryan about his daughter. Why are you looking out there? God's not out there. He ain't going to help you.
I think that they're called spy shots.
Spy shots, yes. Hitchcock shots. Those were those were the famous like Hitchcock shots. The last scene of the episode is Jan trying to glue back together the Dundee that had snapped in half when she threw it into the television.
Which I thought that was very sweet. I mean, she at least was trying to make an effort, and you can see that maybe there's some guilt and, she feels bad about how the night transpired. So to see her at least try to make an attempt to fix it, I thought that was a little bit endearing.
Well, and I think it gets to how wonderfully written the character was and how wonderfully acted the character was. You have this completely dysfunctional relationship. And it's by this point, and again, this is a spoiler, Holly's not on the scene yet. She doesn't come until the beginning of season 5 when she is there to basically replace Toby. And then from there on, they start building the arc with Michael and Holly. But at this point, all Michael ever wanted was Jan. And his whole kind of raison d'etre was to be with Jan. But again, they show out of all this dysfunction, there's humanity there. Even if it's, as oftentimes there was with Jan, a selfish humanity, because it was almost always for her own self-interest, there is still a humanity there. And it's just one of those nice little vignettes that they tended to do, surrounded by the obviously hilarious bits.
And you make a good point, but I also think this episode really highlights how terrible they are for each other,
The functional word I mentioned there was dysfunctional. The couple from hell. Neither one wants to compromise. Neither one wants to budge an inch. It's clear at this point they're only kind of there out of convenience or out of almost status.
I get the sense that from Jan's perspective, it's more of convenience, but I think for Michael, it feels more of like a desperation. And I feel like it had since the beginning of their relationship. Like he really puts her on a pedestal, and his desperation to want to have this like perfect family and perfect life and him trying to achieve that. I think that plays a lot into it.
And I think that definitely does too, because again, this was his dream girl the first 4 seasons. And what you then see a lot of as season 4 is how that pedestal and that kind of ideal image kind of wears away. And what is left is just this wound of what it actually is. And so it's the loss of not only the relationship, which is clearly unhealthy, but also the loss of the fantasy.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. I think this episode really breaks that for Michael.
It breaks the fantasy. It kind of snaps him into reality.
And I think one last scene that we need to mention is when Dwight is driving Michael back to his house and they see the babysitter at the bus stop. So they couldn't give her a ride home. Like what I don't know.
Well, and also too, that's just a great example of Dwight's selfishness and self-centeredness.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess did he give her a nod or something as he drove by? But that's about it.
It's Dwight's just single-minded selfishness and focus. It's a really good episode. It's definitely an acquired taste, but it has so many elements that make the show great.
Yeah, and like I mentioned in the beginning, I think this episode has really grown with fans. And I think over the years, just people, the more you watch it, I think the more you pick up from it and more of the subtleties and the better you realize that this episode is and how ingenious it was written and directed and acted. And it's great.
So that is our rundown of The Office's dinner party. So before we go, I did tease some news, and something that came out within the last couple of weeks is that there is talk about a potential reboot of The Office. So obviously nothing's official yet, kind of the word on the street, and I believe it was Puck News was the first ones who reported it. Basically said that there was a development deal that was being negotiated between, I think it was NBC and Greg Daniels, prior to the strike back in May. The deal was never finalized, but everyone kind of expects the deal to be done very soon now that the strike is over. And one of the things that had been kind of thrown out there was a potential reboot. Now, this is all innuendo. This is all rumor at this point. Nothing's been confirmed. There's no guarantees. And basically the article extremely stresses that there's no guarantee it even gets to the production stage or the development stage. In the past, I know at least John Krasinski has said that he would be open to revisiting the character of Jim. Brian Baumgartner, who played Kevin, and BJ Novak, who played Ryan, and also was one of the writers on the show, have both said they really don't want to be involved in a reboot. I don't really know if Steve Carell would at this point, but that is something to keep an eye on. I'm not really sure, and Laura, I'll get your thoughts. I'm not really sure I want a reboot, but the fact that it would be Greg Daniels involved would give me a little bit of hope.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before recording this episode about that, and I had seen some headlines too. And like you said, it's in the very beginning stages. There's not a ton of details coming out about it. I'm honestly surprised that Brian Baumgartner would not want to be a part of it. He would not be one that I would guess, would want to take a step back from it. BJ Novak, I could certainly see. I think he's moved on to other projects, and he's kind of ready to leave that character behind. For me, in my opinion, I don't necessarily want a reboot of the show, whether that be with the same cast or a different cast. That would do nothing for me. I don't think you could recreate the magic that was the original show. And I just see it failing very quickly if that's the case. But I would rather see either like a reunion show or a movie with the original cast, just kind of showing where they are today, something that was like super time limited and just giving fans kind of little like cherry on top of the episodes and the series, and just kind of a check-in of where everybody is today, and maybe throw some things in there that fans would really appreciate, and especially that have seen all the episodes and know all the little nuances of the show, to put some stuff in there. I think that would be good rather than a reboot of it. So we'll see what comes out of it. But I think, preference wise, I would rather either a reunion or movie out of it.
Or, even just a longer version of what we kind of got with the series finale.
Yeah.
When they do like the whole panel thing, and that's when Joan Cusack steps up and says, "Erin, I'm your mom." And there's that really kind of heartwarming moment with Joan Cusack and Ellie Kemper at the end of the show. There's also when Creed gets arrested, which is just fantastic. Again, the fact that Greg Daniels would be involved would give me hope, because I know he would come up with something unique and original. I don't know. Brian is interesting. He actually just released a cookbook last year of 177 chili recipes, including the one that he made for the show that spilled out on the carpet. And I know Brian also does a lot of touring. I remember a friend told me he was at a Reading Phillies game in Pennsylvania a couple years ago, and Brian was there and made an appearance. And they had a Kevin from The Office, Reading Phillies bobblehead with the chili pot.
See, and that's why I'm surprised, because I feel like he's always really embraced the character and embraced the show and what it did for him. So to hear that he wouldn't want to be involved, that's surprising.
Well, I think it was not as much be involved as much of it as it was, what exactly are we rebooting?
Okay.
The original was already a reboot of the English version.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
At that point, what's there left to reboot? Unless you want to make a new cast, and I guess maybe have Jim run The Office.
I don't see that going well. I really don't.
Or Andy run The Office. I think Ed Helms had said he would maybe be interested in reprising the character. But again, it would feel a lot like the two Michael less seasons. And so I kind of have to see it, and it's kind of one of those things. I'll believe it when I see it's in development.
Yeah, agreed.
We'll just have to wait and see. But again, the fact that Greg Daniels would be involved would give me at least a little bit of hope that it would be good.
Okay, guys, that's our show for this week. So we will be back next week with another episode. So please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and go check out our episode visuals on Instagram and TikTok at the Tell Me About Podcast, and email us episode suggestions and comments to thetellmeaboutpodcast@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Have a good one, everybody.